about to experience the awe and satisfaction of conquering a video game with the Mythic Tyrant.
Hey, what's up everyone? It's the Tyrant here and welcome back to the channel. You know, I try to do a birthday video every year, and you may have noticed that recently I picked back up my Halo Infinite Legendary walkthrough, the 1.0 version. And again, I still plan on doing a 2.0 version down the road and some bonus videos on top of that. But I've had something a bit on my mind recently since I started playing Halo Infinite again. Now, I want to talk about that here today, and essentially it's about what I think they could have done differently, what they might be able to do going forward, and I'm just very curious to hear your thoughts about it. This is not a review video. I know that so there already is a review video on this channel from December of 2021. I'll tell you right now that my opinion of the game hasn't really changed much from that video since then, so it'll still be a while. I know I said in that video that I would do a follow-up review later on when I felt there was more added to the game, and there has been a lot added, but I don't think they're done yet, so I'm going to hold off on doing a 2.0 review a little bit longer. In terms of what they could have done versus what they could do, I know what some of you are thinking, you know, and personally, I still mostly have positive feelings about Halo Infinite. I know there are a lot of you out there who don't, and you are certainly welcome to your opinion. I'm not going to argue with you. Everyone feels a little bit differently about the game, and I think it comes down to, for at least a lot of people, what you enjoy the most about Halo. For those of you who think that I'm going to talk a lot about multiplayer in this, I'm going to bring a couple of things up, but if you're expecting me to talk about things like desync and weapons jamming and things like that, that I don't plan on bringing up, so this video may not be for you, simply because I don't play a lot of multiplayer. My bread and butter for Halo has always primarily been campaign. So even though I'll bring a couple of things up that I'd like to see added down the road for Halo Infinite in terms of multiplayer, the bulk of this video is going to be based on campaign. So I'm making this video based on some tweets that I posted this past weekend. And as I was going back through Halo Infinite's campaign, something struck me, and you know, I'm surprised it really didn't sooner, but the House of Reckoning, which was the second to last mission of Halo Infinite, I really felt like should have been the last mission of the campaign. We have a lot of attention to detail to Eshram, who is the main antagonist, as well as his closest ally, which is Jager Radamnai, aka the Blade Master. And there's a lot there. They really do flesh out, especially Eshram's character, really well. You fight both of them in House of Reckoning, and especially with the mission before that, the road leading up to it, it really felt like it would have been a proper conclusion to the base campaign for Halo Infinite. The Silent Auditorium felt like it was sort of tacked on afterwards. We don't really get a lot of character development for the Harbinger. You know, we see her once in the mission The Spire, or it may be the very end of the mission right before that. I'm not really sure where one mission begins and one ends all the time. But aside from that, I think we see her in maybe one or two hologram scenes when she's interacting with Eshram. And apart from that, then it's just, you know, the last mission. So we don't really get a lot of character development from her. We don't really know a lot about her angle. And so it felt empty, like it didn't need to be there. So today what I'm going to do is I'm going to break down what I would have done in hindsight and what they could still potentially do, as well as address how they could have made Halo Infinite a 10-year plan and still might be able to salvage that, or at least some of it. So we're going to start with this. I already told you how I thought the game should have ended in terms of the campaign. Had they done that, I would have released 4 expansions, one every 2 years. Okay, so if the game came out in 2021, this would have lasted them for the next 10 years. The first expansion I would have done, I would have called Halo Infinite Harbinger. So instead of the Silent Auditorium being the last mission in the base campaign, it would have gotten its own separate expansion, sort of a mini expansion. And to sort of highlight this a little bit, I think my friend Team Respawn, who was a big Halo Wars 2 fan, Halo Wars fan in general, might agree with this. Halo Wars 2 received 2 expansions. One was a sort of a small one that contained 2 additional campaign missions. And then, of course, after that, there was Awakening the Nightmare, which included 5. This sort of would have been like the first expansion, sort of a mini expansion. And what I would have done here is add on maybe 2 or 3 linear missions, maybe modify one of the 4 current islands a little bit, preferably the larger one, Island 4, and included an area where you could enter these linear missions. And I would have only maybe added 2 or 3 max. What this could have done was we could have learned a little bit more about the Endless. So basically at that point, the Banished are sort of in recovery mode since their leadership's been pretty much decimated. And you could learn more about the Endless as well as the Harbinger, and the Silent Auditorium would have been the last mission for that expansion. And that would have basically been it, campaign-wise. Maybe they could add some new vehicles or weapon skins or things like that, possibly just new weapons in general. I wouldn't have gone too overboard with it because it's just, you know, a little mini expansion to sort of let you know that the campaign is still being built. And I bring that up because one thing that I've consistently said about Halo Infinite is that it laid a great foundation in terms of its campaign. There's a lot that it can build on with its open world environment, and I would love to see more of that. And the way the campaign is built, they have that opportunity, and I think this would have been a great first step. In terms of multiplayer, what I also would have added, if it had not been added already, is a dedicated playlist to Griffball, because it is a social fan favorite. It's certainly one of my favorite games, and something that, you know, my community and I play when it comes up in Master Chief Collection. So to have a Halo Infinite version of that would have been absolutely amazing, and we would probably play that on a very regular basis. So that's where I would have started with the first expansion. The second expansion would have taken place 2 years later. To sort of segue for a second, obviously that first expansion really can't happen now unless they modified what I just said. So unless the Harbinger somehow survived that final battle, or if they want to do sort of echoes of the Harbinger instead of Halo Infinite Harbinger, maybe that can flesh out the Endless and what they are a little bit more. So there's still a possibility there, and maybe have a different boss other than the Harbinger at the end of it, but it's a possibility either way, regardless of whether they're planning to do something like that or not. That would have been my first expansion. The second one would introduce a new faction and would take place in the open world environment, or at least would add a new island to the current 4. I would have called this Halo Infinite Return of the Nightmare. Here's what we know. The Flood do exist on the ring. Now, they're most likely still in containment somewhere, but I can imagine some idiot letting them out. And so it would be nice to have another full faction out there in the open world. We do not see a lot of faction versus faction fighting in this game other than the UNSC and the Banished. And one of the things that classic Halo is primarily known for, and one of the things that made it so appealing to me early on, was seeing these Team AI versus Team AI battles. We see this a lot in the tail end of Halo Combat Evolved, or at least the second half of the game. We see this a little bit in Halo 2 and Halo 3, and it would have been really cool to have seen this here. We didn't really see much of it in Halo 4. There was maybe one mission where the Prometheans and the Covenant were against each other, and we did see a bit more of it in Halo 5, but again, it was between the Covenant and the Prometheans. So it would be nice to see the Flood make a return, because we have not seen the Flood return to campaign, at least in a mainstream game. We obviously saw them in a Halo Wars 2 expansion, but in a mainstream game, first-person shooter since 2007. So I would love to see this. I'm sure Hidden Xperia would agree. Seeing the Flood return with Halo Infinite's graphics and engine would be pretty cool. What I would have done for this one is, again, like I said before, create a new island. So this would be Island 5, and a new biome on top of that. We have currently 4 islands in Halo Infinite, and the biome is the same for all of them. Basically, it looks like Kirkland, Washington. So what I would do for this particular biome is I would make it sort of a swamp-like environment, sort of like 343 Guilty Spark in Halo Combat Evolved, or maybe a jungle-esque swamp environment similar to the Mission Infinity in Halo 4. And one of the things I would do here is probably, unlike the previous expansion that I just explained, make it a little bit longer. Maybe give it, possibly 5 campaign missions, similar to Awakening the Nightmare. And maybe 2 or 3 of those could take place in a linear environment, similar to 343 Guilty Spark. Or, on top, and then the other 2, I should say, and the other 2 could take place in the open world. And what I would love to see here is, for the open world part anyway, you see some of the Banished engage the Flood. So we get some of that faction versus faction combat again. And I do miss that. And we could, of course, have that in the linear missions too. But I think it would be a great spectacle, because again, it's been a while since we've seen the Flood actually battle the Covenant, or in this case, the Banished, in a first-person shooter. So it would be great to see that type of combat scenario return, in my opinion. Another thing that I would add here is, and again, I don't know how many of you play World of Warcraft, but in one of their expansions, this one was called Legion. One thing that they did was, in one of the patches that they applied to the game, and of course, by then, most people had, leveled out their characters or leveled up their characters to max level. What they introduced was something called demon invasions. And what these were, essentially, were scenarios where it would dynamically change the environment of whatever zone the demons were invading. So let's just say, I'll just throw one off the top of my head. Again, if you don't play it, you may not know this, but usually new World of Warcraft continents are divided into different zones. Let's just say the zone High Mountain is being invaded by the Legion. What would happen in that scenario is it would dynamically change the entire environment. It would add new quests that were temporary, and on top of, and some new objectives, and you could acquire reputation from them, as well as several other different things. The way, and then of course you only had a limited time to do it. How I envision how that could translate to this expansion is, every now and then, or maybe this could be a weekly challenge type thing, one island would become flood infested, so to speak. And it would dynamically change the environment, and there would be different objectives for that island, assuming that you already finished the campaign. And that way you'd have more stuff to do. And if this stuff happened weekly, it would reward you. And maybe this could be in a form of maybe new Spartan cores, or Spartan armor, or skins, or weapon variants, or things like that. It would reset weekly, and you'd have the opportunity to go and battle these things. And so the way they address this in World of Warcraft is sometimes it would be just a scenario if you came across one of these new objectives, and sometimes it would be a boss. And I can see that very easily with Halo, with a franchise like Halo, especially with the number of enemies that we've seen introduced into the Flood faction. You could have a Flood Juggernaut be the boss. You could have a Flood Behemoth, like what we saw in Halo 2 or Halo Wars 2. And so that would be introduced in the Flood expansion, and you would get that every week. So it would give you a reason to keep returning to the campaign and to acquire new stuff, and it would give you rewards as a result. And I would love to have seen something like that. And then hopefully they could still do something like that. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. But again, this would affect a different island every week, and essentially you would travel to that island, you would take care of the objectives, and basically expunge it of the Flood. And I can easily see the Banished coming into play too. Maybe you come up to a scenario and the Banished are already fighting the Flood, they're making them their top priority, but they also attack you as well. So I think that would be an excellent way to sort of get people to continuously return to the campaign even after they've beaten it. I also would introduce, if it hadn't been already, the Infection mode for social playlists, and make that a permanent playlist along with Griffball that I talked about earlier. Again, it's another fan favorite and one of mine personally. So I would love to see that introduced. That would be the perfect time to do it. Again, if they did not if they did not put that in the base campaign or base release of it, or the expansion that came out after that. So that would be a perfect time to do that. So the third expansion that I would propose is, I call it Halo Infinite Uprising. This would again add another island and a new biome on top of that. This would be a desert-like biome, and I sort of picture the Ark from Halo 3 with this one. And we've seen it in multiplayer maps in Halo Infinite, so I know it's doable, and I know it would look fine. In this one, we would introduce, again, another faction. And it would be the Prometheans. I know some of you have mixed feelings about the Prometheans. I thought they were done really well in Halo 5. Yes, the random teleporting does sort of get on my nerves a little bit, but they were much more balanced compared to the ones in Halo 4. And I can even see them adding new species or variants of Prometheans for this. And story-wise, I sort of see this as, now that Cortana is no longer around, the Prometheans really don't have a entity to lead them, but somehow they find out that the Flood has been released on Zeta Halo, and so they arrive on Zeta Halo to sort of try to contain the outbreak. So again, this could be a short to medium expansion that sort of expands on their story and their characters, or their characteristics and how they function. So I could see anywhere from 3 to 5 missions with this one as well. And again, it would introduce another faction. So you'd have the Banished still there. You'd have the Flood that are still an issue. And now the Prometheans as well. Similar to the way I proposed the last expansion, this would introduce another possibility to do the same type of invasion mode that I talked about before in the previous expansion. Again, once a week, you could have an island being taken over by the Prometheans, and you have to take the island back. And we've already seen boss-like enemies for the Prometheans at this point. The Warden Eternal being a prime example. Now, I think the Warden was defeated at the end of Halo 5. They didn't really clarify that. But I could see something, if not necessarily the Warden, something similar to him as a boss to contend with. And they could alternate. Now that we have multiple factions in place, they could alternate between Flood invasions and Promethean invasions. And I think that would be a nice way to spice things up. You could even add Banished invasions. There are so many boss-like vehicles and units that the Banished have available to them that would make great scenarios for this. We obviously know about the Scarab from Halo Wars 2. One of my personal favorites, even though this is Covenant, is the Grunt Goblin from Halo 5. I would love to see a Banished version of that. I don't remember exactly what this unit is called, but it reminds me, it's another crawler unit from Halo Wars 2. It's four-legged, and it shoots beams from it. I'm sure Team Respawn knows what this is. It's been a while since I've played Halo Wars 2, but I could see a lot of elements from Halo Wars 2 being implemented to make Banished invasions work as well. And it would be nice to see this environment sort of get mixed up every once in a while. Some weeks you might have Promethean invasions, some weeks you'd have Flood invasions, and others you'd have Banished who are desperately fighting because they've lost their leadership, so now they're trying to reclaim the ring. In terms of multiplayer, what I would probably add here is Warzone Firefight from Halo 5. I enjoy Warzone Firefight a lot, so does my community. We would play it every month for our community game nights. And having that back in, it's basically, again, firefight with objectives, which is really nice to have. That way it's not continuously ongoing. You have certain things that you have to accomplish, and once you do, the match is over. And in that way, you could play with, again, 8 or more people. You would have certain enemies that you'd have to take out, or certain scenarios that you have to gain control over. And, to me, that was a lot of fun. And to my community, that's a lot of fun. So with the other factions involved in that point, you'd have the option to include Banished enemies, Promethean enemies, and Flood-based enemies. And I think that would be a really cool feature to add back. And again, you could add, just like what Halo 5 did, add a lot of variants to the current weapon sandbox and the vehicle sandbox as well. And just have a blast every single time. Again, I really enjoyed Halo 5's Warzone Firefight. I enjoyed Halo 5's multiplayer a lot altogether, as well as the mechanics. So it would be nice to sort of reintroduce that into the Halo universe. The fourth and final expansion, again, released 2 years later, so now we're at that 10-year span here, had they actually gone with my plan. Again, still not too late to go with some of this stuff. It would have been called Halo Infinite: The Endless. So remember when I talked about how in the first expansion I proposed, it sort of mentions the Endless, but it doesn't actually introduce them physically to the player. It may just go over some of their history. This expansion would once again add another island, and it would be a tundra environment this time. So think of Assault on the Control Room or any of the other winter-based missions that we've had in the Halo franchise prior to this. So we'd have a winter biome at this point, a swamp-like biome / jungle biome, a desert-like biome on top of what we already have. And again, you could traverse these islands as much as you want to. There'd be fobs to unlock here, so you could transport yourself anywhere, and it would just further expand upon the world. This would bring the Endless as a regular faction into the equation. We already know from what we saw in campaign that the Endless are deemed to be more dangerous than the Flood. I would love to see an enemy that's deemed more dangerous than the Flood, considering the history we know of the Flood. And it would be wonderful just to have yet another faction involved. Once again, you could have this as either maybe 4 or 5 additional campaign missions. You could have some of them linear, but some of them also take place in the open world environment. And once you have completed that, again, I'm not really sure what the final boss would be here because I'm not really that familiar with what the Endless are. But again, we would learn more about them as we go along, and this would sort of be the ultimate threat here. And this would sort of bring the campaign portion of Halo Infinite to a close. Once again, afterwards, you would have the option weekly to do these invasion type of scenarios. So again, you have endless scenarios. When I say endless scenarios, I mean endless as in the faction. But once again, it would alternate between Banished scenarios, Flood scenarios, and Promethean scenarios alongside of the endless scenarios. So you'd have these alternate throughout the weeks. Again, unlocking new armor. Maybe you could unlock or gain more valor to unlock new weapons and vehicles that maybe these enemies possess that the UNSC or Banished do not. Or maybe just add new vehicles altogether. But you could add a lot to that here. And it would just give so much replay value to the campaign to have, essentially, now you've got 4 different factions to play with. Because I do sort of loop the Sentinels in with the Prometheans. I don't know if that's accurate or not. I'm sure some of my Halo lore folks out there could probably maybe clarify that. But I would sort of loop Sentinels in with the Prometheans for their invasion scenarios. Maybe add in the Sentinel Enforcer, which we haven't seen since Halo 2. That would be pretty awesome as well. But yes, I would add the Endless to that, close off the story, and as a final note to multiplayer, again, hopefully they're adding more stuff other than this, additional maps and things like that. I would add traditional firefight mode. And what you could do with this, again, you'd have endless waves, or maybe you could select the number of waves you have, but you could also either have random enemies, or you could select the faction that you want to fight. So maybe in one faction you're fighting the Banished, another wave comes along and you're fighting the Flood, another one the Prometheans, the next one the Endless. Maybe you can mix and match them up a little bit. Again, you'd have endless things to do with the settings. Or you could just have a match where you're fighting only one type of enemy. So at that point, you would have, on top of all the new islands, which I believe at this point, if my count is correct, that would be 7 islands total, which I think Bungie would appreciate that. And on top of that, you would have Griffball, you would have Infection, you would have Warzone Firefight, and you would also, if you want a firefight mode that's more personal, you could also have just standard firefight. Those are things I would absolutely love to see involved. I could see, if they did that, a 10-year plan for Halo Infinite. I can see something like that bringing players back continuously, not just to multiplayer, but to the campaign. And again, campaign is my bread and butter. I know a lot of people out there love it too. I know not everyone plays Halo for the campaign, but I'm certainly one of those folks who does. And I would love to see more involvement, more enthusiasm towards the campaign, and more PvP PvE elements in Halo Infinite. So as I mentioned previously, I think that Halo Infinite has the foundation for this. I think at least a lot of this is possible if this is something that 343 would be willing to listen to and potentially commit to. So that's my thoughts on what I may have changed about Halo Infinite prior to its initial release, what I would have added on to it, what they could potentially do now, and where we could see Halo Infinite in the future. I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions in the comments section below. And I want to take a moment to thank each and every one of you for taking the time out of your busy day to sit down and watch this video. I really do hope that you enjoyed it. And if you did, I hope you'll consider subscribing for more great content right here on the channel. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all have an absolutely wonderful week and a happy new year. I'll catch you all right back here next time. And as always, I'm the Tyrant, signing off.